Welcome back to University English 2, the skills. We're looking at Unit 6, the Exhibitionist, and this involves the linguistics and strategies required to describe works, people and their personalities, places, concepts, actions, and processes. I'm going to begin with an introduction, and then we'll explore the 5 senses. This will be followed by looking at describing nouns. In particular, we'll look at adjectives, the royal order of adjectives, determiners, and how we can compare nouns with one another. Then we'll take a look at adverbs, the formation of adverbs, irregular adverbs, and the mobility of adverbs, how they can easily move. Then we'll look at verb Catenae for descriptions. In particular, we'll have a brief look at present and past tense, and then the 2 aspects of progressive and perfect. We'll then examine strategies which can be used for describing various things, including people, places, things, ideas, and processes. And finally, we'll be summarizing at the end. Evelyn Beatrice Hall, in The Friends of Voltaire in 1906, said, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Now, on many occasions during both your academic and your working careers, you will be asked to describe your own work and its progress, its results, and its conclusions. Now, depending on your academic or working field, this work could involve art or design. It might be an experiment. It might be a business project or a recipe or an investigation of some kind, or even preparation for some form of an event. Now here we're going to focus on descriptions of works, whatever those works might be, and processes which are involved in the development of these works. And this will allow you to comprehensively be able to gather the skills required to explain why your work was started or initiated, to give details on its progress at various stages in its development, to illustrate and explain the results, to make observations, and to then draw conclusions. Now, a good place to begin is the 5 senses. And this is because we all gain our understanding of the environment around us through our senses. And these are the sense of touch, the sense of taste, the sense of smell, the sense of sight, and the sense of hearing. Now, when you're describing something, you should actually stop to consider how we would express our understanding to another person in the context in which we ourselves experience it. And the way we experience it is through these very 5 senses. Now, for example, if you were describing a food, well, you might give details on how it tastes, also what it smells like, what it looks like, what its texture is when you place it in your mouth, and even you might describe the sounds it's making when you are cooking it. By providing all of these details, the person you are communicating with is then able to visualize the experience, the whole experience, through their mind's eye in the way that they would have experienced it if they were there in person with their senses available to them. So always begin by thinking about the 5 senses when you're thinking about describing. Let's look then at describing nouns in particular. Now, what are nouns? Nouns are people, places, things, or ideas. How do we describe them? Well, adjectives are used to describe nouns or pronouns. Now, where do you place the adjective? Well, the adjective is generally placed before the noun it is describing if it is part of that noun phrase. And this is then called an attributive adjective. They can come after the noun they are describing, usually after a linking verb, such as the be verb, if they're describing the subject. And these are called predicative adjectives. Now, some nouns or pronouns are described by placing adjectives after them, and these kinds of adjectives are then called post-positive adjectives. So let's take a look at some examples. And here we're actually looking at grammar quite a lot. So just as a refresher, red means it is the subject, blue is the verb, green is object, and grey is a subject complement. That means that is, in fact, telling you what the subject is. And subject complements can be adjectives or noun phrases. Also not seen here would be the purple, which are adverbs, which we'll be seeing some shortly, and also the yellow, which are actually prepositional phrases, which can function as adjectives themselves or as adverbs. So let's take a look at the first example here. He was an interesting old man. Now notice that interesting is single underlined, old is single underlined. In this presentation, these will denote adjectives. Un has a squiggly line underneath it, and this is going to denote a determiner, which we'll look at in a moment. In fact, this is a central determiner. Now, uninteresting man here is actually describing he. It is what he is, or was what he is. So this is a what we would call then an attributive adjective. Interesting and old are describing man, and an interesting old man itself is the subject complement, which is actually telling you what he is. For predicative adjectives, you've got he was old and feeble, but interesting. So in this case, there is no noun phrase actually as a subject complement. This is simply an adjective. Old and feeble, but interesting. Well, we've got 3 adjectives. What are they describing? They are describing he, as in the subject here. So these would then be predicative adjectives for he. I met someone interesting and old. Now these are post-positive adjectives. Interesting is describing the someone, and old is describing the someone as well, but they are coming after someone. And with indefinite pronouns, often adjectives come after them in this way. Now, when using more than one adjective, predicative and post-positive adjectives are separated by conjunctions, and these are conjunctions are words which join things together. An example, a very common example, is and these will be between the final 2 at least, and elsewhere if you wish, depending on how you wish to express yourself. And they are usually separated by commas when there are 3 or more. Now, if these principles are not followed, the structure can appear to be a little odd. So here, for example, he was old, feeble, interesting. Okay. But it would be better to have old followed by a comma to represent a pause, feeble, and a comma after it would be optional in this case, because there should be and as well between the final two here. So it sounds strange. In writing, it looks wrong. I met someone interesting old. Well, again, it sounds a bit strange. You've got two adjectives there describing the someone. Perhaps you need to add and between the two. I met someone interesting and old. So remember to do this in the cases of post-positive adjectives like what you see after someone, and also in predicative adjectives like what you see in the first example, old, feeble, and interesting, describing the he. Now, for attributive adjectives, separation by conjunctions and commas is not actually that common, but it may be attempted depending on the style desired by the writer. So there is some liberty actually to express yourself in a way that you choose, and that liberty always exists in languages. However, if the adjectives are from a similar category, and we'll be looking at categories in a moment, they generally should have a comma or a conjunction separating them. So in the first example here, it looks like un, so un is here a central determiner telling you the quantity of the table, which is the head noun in this phrase. So elegant, small, coffee, table. So here, elegant and small are from different categories. They are describing different things. Elegant is telling you what you is giving an opinion about it, whereas small is telling you a size. So these are different things that are being described. Coffee is actually part of the compound noun of table, but it's telling you what the table actually functions as. So you don't really need commas between these because they're from different categories. But in the next one, she is a calm, cool, and collected person. So here, the adjectives are from similar categories. Calm and cool and collected are all about describing her demeanor or her personality. They're all describing something from a similar kind of thing. So they need to have some kind of distinction between them. And typically we would use commas and conjunctions to divide them in this case. Now, predicative adjectives, those which will describe the subject typically and will come after the verb, serving as subject complements. So she is happy. Happy is a predicative adjective. If you want to have more than one of those adjectives, they don't need to have any particular order. You can place them in whichever order you like, depending on the style that you choose. And it's the same thing with post-positive adjectives, those which will go to say someone interesting and cute or cute and interesting. You can put it in either order. But with attributive adjectives, you do generally need to follow some kind of order, or they can sound a little bit strange to a native speaker. Now, sometimes referred to as the royal order of adjectives, the precise order in which these adjectives should be placed has been quite difficult actually to figure out. And many linguists have tried to actually make some kind of rule for it, but there is no rule because once again, many writers and speakers will find that they want to put their own style or their own emphasis on the way that they are ordering these adjectives. However, it has been noted that a particular order is used most of the time, 78% of the time, according to Wolf's research in 2003. Now, not in Wolf's research, but purpose, which often uses gerunds, which are nominal present participles, ing forms of verbs, which are being used as nouns, which would be then a gerund. And compound nouns, for example, coffee, table, the coffee is telling you what the purpose of the table actually is. It's a coffee table. These could be considered to be compound nouns. This has actually been added to the end because that's the position of those compound nouns and gerunds. Now, this great research, does end up with a very awkward acronym for us to try to remember. GSSSACPMP. Not many people are going to actually remember that. It's not exactly a catchy acronym. All right, so rather than actually think about that large and inconvenient acronym, you can think about it as three main categories for attributive adjectives. So before the head noun, you would have opinions first, and then physical traits, and then innate qualities. Let's take a look, though, at, in more detail, the differences between these ones in the categories themselves. So for opinions, you should start with a general opinion and then a specific opinion. General opinions are adjectives which really can be used with any kind of noun. For example, good, bad, brilliant, excellent, nice, awful, important, strange, nasty, beautiful, and ugly. They can all be used really with any kind of noun. An ugly idea, a good cup, a brilliant person, a strange idea. So they can be used with anything. So they will come first, and then specific opinions next. And these can only be used with certain kinds of nouns, or it just sounds very strange. For example, it would be very difficult to say a tasty table. No, tasty is more for food or drink. So it's a specific opinion. So this should really come after a general opinion. So let's imagine that you want to say bread. So it's tasty, good bread. Maybe better to say it's good, tasty bread. So try to keep it in that order. But as examples of specific opinions then, tasty and delicious would be for food or drink. Heroic, cowardly, that was a personality. Sour, that's food or drink again. Clever person, smart person, intelligent person, a stupid person. Expensive thing, cheap thing. So all of these are quite specific. Now, for physical traits, we will generally have the order of size first, and then shape, and then age, and then color, generally speaking. So for size could be words like large, small, big, little, tall, short, huge, tiny, minuscule, towering, gigantic. For shape, square, triangular, circular, hexagonal, rectangular, oval, oblong, round, elliptical, spherical, three-dimensional. For age, could be something as simple as new or old, but there are other adjectives: modern, historic, elderly, mature, immature, which is the opposite of mature, ancient, very old, aged, young, fresh. For colour, there are many colours: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And you can have variations of those: light green, azure, sky blue, deep red. And then we move on to innate qualities as we start to get closer to the noun. And first we would have the origin, if it's included, such as English or Chinese, German, Russian, Japanese, Thai, Mexican, Canadian, Brazilian, Korean, Italian. And then material, what it's made out of: wooden, pine, oak, mahogany, paper, metal, iron, steel, gas, liquid, air. And then the purpose. And once again, technically, these are not actually adjectives. These are gerunds which are actually going to form compound nouns. For example, racing car. It's telling you what the car does, the purpose of the car. And race, the verb to race, has been changed into racing to tell you the purpose of the car. So racing car, and you can use other compound nouns with this as well, like tea bag, lightning rod, desk chair, It's not a desk, it's a chair, but it's a chair for a desk. Gardening tool, shopping bag, riding crop, wedding ring, sleeping bag, deck, chair, basketball, court. So these are just some examples of how the purpose can be qualified with these gerunds or just simply with compound nouns. Now, it's very difficult to remember, again, the acronym, but bear in mind opinions, physical qualities, and then innate qualities, right? So opinions, physical traits, size, shape, age, color, and then innate qualities. Where does it come from? What is it made out of? And what does it do at the end? Now, any adverbs which describe the adjectives, adverbs have three functions. They can describe verbs, they can describe adjectives, or they can describe other adverbs. Now, any adverbs describing the adjectives will come before the adjective that they are describing. And then these are often referred to as pre-modified adjectives. And these modified adjectives will then come first in any list of adjectives, regardless of their usual placement order. So once you modify an adjective, usually it will go first in the order. Commas are usually only used after these modified adjectives if the normal position has been changed. For example, you might say, he likes that elegant big alarm clock. So alarm is part of the compound noun alarm clock, but for the adjectives themselves, you've got elegant and big. Well, I want to stress big. I want it to become very big instead. So I'm using the adverb very to now describe big. In that case, I will usually move that to the front here. So it becomes then, he likes that, and that is a determiner, as we'll see soon. So that's very big, and then usually we'll place a comma here, elegant alarm clock. The comma being placed because we've changed the normal order, because we wish to bring stress to the big part. Now, as we've seen, at the start of a noun phrase, before all of the adjectives, we will place any determiners. Now, determiners add information to nouns, but they do not change the core meaning of the noun in the same way that adjectives do. For determiners, there are three types: predeterminers, central determiners, and post determiners. Now note that you can only use one predeterminer and one central determiner at a time in the noun phrase. It is possible, though, to have more than one post determiner. So now we're going to use a particular style of underlining to show the different kinds of determiners. So for predeterminers, we're going to have a very closely dotted line. For central determiners, we've got the squiggly underline. And then for post determiners, we've got a dot with a line, a dot and a line. So in the example here, you can see all the last few very delicious lemon flavored Italian ice cream cones melted. Okay, so for the head noun is cones. Ice cream, that's part of the compound nouns telling you the purpose of the cone. It's an ice cream cone. And then you can see we have provenance. Where does it come from? Italian. And then we've got its characteristics, its flavor, lemon flavored. And then opinion, general, in this case, specific opinion, because it's related to food, delicious. And we've also modified delicious, very delicious as well. But in front of all of these adjectives and the modified adjective at the beginning here, we have our determiners. And we have one predeterminer, all. We have one central determiner, the. meaning we know which ones. And then we have two post-determiners, last few. Now here we have some examples of what you might actually find in these different categories of determiners. So predeterminers, central and post-determiners, what kinds of words do you normally find in these categories? Well, for predeterminers, you will often find multipliers, words like once, twice, or double. For example here, double the price. So the predeterminer before the central determiner the, and then the head noun price. Also fractions, half or 2/3, half the price. Distributives, both or all. For example, all the melons. Exclamatives, what and such. For example, what a surprise. Central determiners are the most common kinds of determiners. And these will include articles. Articles, there are three, a, un, and the. A and un you will use if you are, it means one, as you might recall from the previous lecture. It means one, but it means one which we're not actually sure which specific one. So if you say, can I have a pen? You mean, I don't know exactly which pen, but I just want one. The, on the other hand, is used not in the context of one, but the is being used to indicate that you know what you're talking about. So if I say, give me the pen, then I know which pen I am talking about. And the can be used with plural, with something that is not equal to one as well, whereas a or un is only used when there is a singular noun, when the noun is equal to one specifically. For possessive, so the example here, such a fool. So one of many fools, such a fool. Also possessives can be here as well. So my, your, his, her, our. Both my friends. So it belongs to me. And demonstratives, this and that, this which is close in proximity. And also this and that, by the way, and these and those are used in relation to not just physical distance. This and these, by the way, are used when something is close to you physically, but also, for example, if you are writing and you're talking about an idea which you just wrote in the previous sentence, then you might use this. Whereas if you wrote about it previously, you might use that because it's further away in your writing. So this and that are used for singular, for something equal to one, and these and those for plural, for greater than one. So this means close, that means far, these means close, and those means far. So the example, all these grapes. So notice that we've added an S to grape because to show that it's actually not one. So all these grapes, it's going to be hopefully a lot of yummy grapes. And then finally, we've got post-determiners. And these will include numbers, one, first, next, last, half my last few dates, and quantifiers. So often post-determiners, as you can see, are related to quantification, how much or how many things you're having, and also to numbers as well. So examples here, few, many. There are a lot of quantifiers. There are just a couple of examples. So all these, many people. Once again, be aware the most common determiners are central determiners. All right. And you can only use one determiner at a time, except for post-determiners. So don't try to use are my friends or are my friend, these your gloves. No, you can only use one. So one at a time. Now, in this way, by using nouns that we want to use to describe what we're describing, and then adjectives to further describe those nouns, and adverbs to describe the adjectives, and determiners to tell us a little bit more information about these nouns, we can then form very, very vivid and very descriptive noun phrases. As an example here, let's take a look. The last very weird looking, dangerous, gigantic, stick-shaped, ancient, white, English, cloth-covered, killer patient needs medication. So as you can see there, we've got central determiner, the, post determiner, last, and then we've got an adverb describing the general opinion, very weird looking. And then following the order, we've got general opinion, specific opinion, dangerous, size, gigantic, shape, stick-shaped, age, ancient, color, white, origin, English, material, cloth-covered, purpose, killer. And finally, we have the head noun, and all of this is part of the subject, patient. And then we've got the verb, needs, and our object, in this case, medication. Now, another thing that we want to be able to do, if we're going to be able to describe in detail, is to be able to compare things. So let's look at comparing nouns with one another. Now, an adjective can be used to compare without any change in the form of the adjective if you use this structure. And the structure is not, as, and then you place the adjective followed by as again. If you leave out the not, it means that they are the same. So for example, if I say this is not as nice as that, then that is nicer than this. But if I say this is as nice as that, then I am actually saying that they are the same. They are equally nice. Now, an adjective's form can be morphed. It can be changed to that of a comparative or to that of a superlative adjective as well, if we want to actually compare. Comparative and superlative forms will morph or change simply their form directly, or they will use more or less, or most or least as adverbs to alter the absolute adjective's meaning. Now, when making a direct comparison in the same sentence, often than is used, though it is possible not to use than if the context of the comparison is already known. For superlative forms, there is only one of this class. There is only one. And when there is only one, then we know which one. So in this case, we use the before superlative forms in most cases. So for example here, A says, Sally is not as stylish as Bill. So the adjective and the absolute adjective is stylish. And using this structure, the not as something as structure with something being an adjective, we can say that Bill is more stylish than Sally, right? Now, B then replies and says, everyone is less stylish than Bill. He is the most stylish person in school. So now we're using less actually to stress stylish rather than use the not as stylish as. Everyone now is less stylish than Bill, so not as stylish as Bill. And then we go on to say that he is the, and notice we've added the now, most stylish person in the school. So now we're using a superlative structure in order to stress that he is the number one in the school in relation to style, and because there is only one number one, the is used in this case before most. Now, how the adjectives change typically depends on the number of syllables. So what is a syllable? A syllable is a vowel sound. For example, the word interesting has 4 syllables, 4 vowel sounds in that particular word. And it also depends on the original spelling of the absolute adjective, such as when it ends in a consonant vowel consonant structure. The vowels, the written vowels in English, by the way, are A, E, I, O, U. Sometimes Y is a vowel as well when speaking, but let's keep an eye on the written vowels here because we're looking at the written structure. So A, E, I, O, U is a vowel. Every other letter is a consonant. So if you have a CVC structure and that's an ending, it might have an impact on how you're going to morph or change this adjective in order to make a comparison. Now note that any prefixes, that means things that you're putting at the beginning of a lexeme or a base word, are not counted in the number of syllables for formation. For example, unhappy is actually counted as 2 syllables in relation to its morphology. All right. In other words, the unhappy is 3 syllables, but actually un is a prefix that we're adding to the beginning to say essentially sad, not happy, unhappy. But actually we're counting it as 2 syllables because the base word, the lexeme, is happy. So don't count any prefixes when it comes to the number of syllables for formation. Also note that the so-called rules, which I'm about to get into on the next slide, should be taken more as principles rather than rules because there are quite a few exceptions. For example, polite can actually be politer and it can be more polite. Let's take a look then at these morphology principles. So if you have one syllable, a one-syllable absolute adjective, the basic rule is you add ER for the comparative if you want to compare it with something else, or EST if you're talking about one in its class. For example, fast, add ER and you can say faster. Add EST and you have fastest. And notice we've added the because there is only one who is the fastest in that particular group. However, if you have a one-syllable word which ends in a CVC structure, then typically you're going to double the final consonant and then add ER, or double the final consonant and then add EST. For example, big as an absolute adjective would become bigger with 2 G's and then ER, or the biggest with 2 G's and then EST. And finally, if you have one syllable which ends in E, then because it already has an E at the end, typically we will just add an R or an ST for the comparative or the superlative. For example, nice will become nicer with just an R added, or the nicest with just ST added. Now for equal to or greater than 2, then typically here we will use more if you want to say a greater number, a greater quantity of the quality, or less if you want to say less of a quantity of the quality for the comparative, or most or least for the superlative. For example, peaceful has 2 syllables there, so we could say more peaceful or less peaceful, or the most peaceful or the least peaceful. And then for interesting, we would say less or more interesting, and the most or the least interesting. Now, for words which have two syllables and which end in er, ow, or le, then in most of these cases you have a choice. You can add er or est to make the comparative or the superlative, or you can add more or less, or most or least. For example, clever. You can say cleverer. You can also say more clever or less clever. And the cleverest, or the most clever, or the least clever. For stable, this could be more stable, less stable, stabler, the most stable, the least stable, the stablest. Narrow, less or more narrow, the most or the least narrow, and then the narrowest as well. So for those which are equal to or less than 2, which end in a Y, in these cases, usually you delete the Y and then you add I, ER, or I, EST. For example, funny, ending in a Y, change the Y to I, becomes funnier, IER, and the funniest, IEST. Now, there are not many words which are greater than 2 syllables which end in a Y, but if there are, then you would use more or less for the comparative, or most or least for the superlative. For example, rudimentary, which means simple. Then you could say more rudimentary or less rudimentary, or the most rudimentary or the least rudimentary. And then for imaginary, you could say less imaginary, more imaginary, the least imaginary, or the most imaginary. Now, it's worth noting that there are some irregular or not regular, not normal, comparatives and superlatives. Some of them are very common and you need to know them. For example, good does not become gooder. It becomes better as a comparative. And the goodest, no, it is in fact the best. It's the same with bad. Bad does not become badder. No, it becomes worse as a comparative. He is worse than you. And as a superlative, the worst. He is the worst. Those two, it's very important for you to remember because they are such common adjectives. There are others. Far, in terms of distance and time, would become further and then the furthest. But far in relation to distance only, so can be used only for distance, is farther and then the farthest. Old for people only can become elder and the eldest. You can still use, of course, older and the oldest, but there is an alternative, elder and the eldest for people. For late, in terms of order rather than in terms of time. So in terms of the order in a sequence, would become latter and then the lattermost. And early, in terms of order in a sequence, would become former and then the foremost. Few, in relation to count nouns, would become fewer and the fewest. And little, which is used in relation to non-count nouns, would become less and the least. And then finally, lots, which can be used with any noun, would become simply more or the most. Let's move on to look at how we can describe verbs. Now, verbs are actions, occurrences, or conditions. Adverbs are used to describe verbs, but as I mentioned earlier, they can also be used to describe adjectives and other adverbs as well. Now, adverbs are typically derived from adjectives. That means we take an adjective and then we morph it or change it to turn it into an adverb. And this change usually takes the place of adding ly to the end of the adjective form. Now, as the addition of ly will make these forms at least 2 syllables, if you want to actually start comparing them or showing which is the best or the worst in its class, then typically you're just going to use more or less and the most or the least because of the number of syllables involved, in the same way as you would with adjectives. For example, he is a poor artist. So we're looking at the adjective poor here. So he does paint very poorly. So poor is an adjective. It's describing artist, but now poorly is actually describing how he paints. So it's describing actually the verb itself. Very is also an adverb, which is describing how poorly, another adverb. So poorly is describing how he paints, and very is describing poorly. I've just taken the word poor as an adjective as its lexem, and I've added ly to the end of this base word to change it into the adverb. But less poorly than you. So notice I'm just using less actually now as an adverb to describe poorly in order to actually compare it with somebody else. Less poorly than you. So once again, we can use more or less and the most or the least to create the comparative or superlative forms of these adverbs. Now, once again, there are some irregular adverbs, quite a few of them. So, for example, good as an adverb becomes well, right? Not goodly, right? Well. And the comparative adverb is not welly or less well. It actually is better. We use better, which is the same as the adjective form, and then the best. Bad becomes badly. He plays badly. He plays well. The comparative is the same as the adjective form. He plays worse than you. He plays the worst in the school as the superlative. Fast as an adjective is the same as an adverb. So fast and fast, he is fast, he plays fast, it's the same. There's no fastly. And the comparative adverb would be faster. He plays faster than you. And the superlative would also be the fastest. Hard is the same as an adverb as well. I study hard. It is hard, right? Adjectives and adverbs, both. So the comparative is harder. He studies harder than you. And the hardest is the superlative. For high, in terms of direction, then the adverb is high as well. And the comparative is higher and the superlative the highest. Low, also for direction, would be low for an adverb. The comparative is lower and the lowest. He fly low, for example. Far as in distance, the adverb is far, and you can use farther or further, or the farthest or the furthest. And close as in distance, close is also an adverb, and the comparative is closer and the closest. And then wide as in distance is also wide. It is wide. He's turning wide. It's the same as an adverb and an adjective. Comparative is wider and the superlative the widest. And then early in relation to time only, early is also an adverb. And earlier and the earliest. Late, time, late is an adverb as well. as the adjective, and then later and the latest. And then right and wrong, meaning on principle here, as in your actions are on principle good or bad. So in this case, then, right as an absolute adverb would be right, and the comparative would be rightly, and there's no superlative. Wrong, the adverb is wrong, and the comparative is wrongly on principle. For example, I might say, I acted rightly, meaning the principles of my actions were correct. Now, there are some adjectives which actually have more than one possible adverb form. For example, cheap, you can use as an adverb also cheap, the same as the adjective, but you can use cheaply as well. Loud, loud or loudly. Quick, quick or quickly. Slow, slow or slowly. So you can opt whether you want to simply use the adjective as an adverb without any change, or you can add the ly for those very common adjectives. Okay, so let's look now at where we actually place these adverbs. So adverbs which describe adjectives or other adverbs are usually placed before the adverbs which they are modifying or changing in some way. Now, these will include things like adverbs of degree, such as very, telling you how much. Also adverbs of frequency, which tell you how often, words like always or sometimes. And adverbs of confirmation, words which stress that this is a yes, words like certainly, or negation, which stress a no, such as never. Now, these are typically placed either within the verb structure itself, the verb string called the verb catena, or after the verb catena and the objects of the verb. So let's take a look at some examples. The batter struck the balls amazingly hard. Okay, so hard is how the batter struck the balls. So this is actually an adverb which is describing a verb here, the verb struck. And it's telling us how, or the manner in which the balls were struck. And we've placed it after the object, the balls, in this case. Amazingly is describing hard, and it's telling us the degree. How hard? Amazingly hard means really, really hard. The degree in which it was struck. For the second example, the winter air didn't instantly chill the old man. Okay, so in this case here we have two adverbs. The first is an adverb of negation. And one of the most common adverbs of negation, by the way, is not, which is used to make negative or disaffirmative structures. So not is an adverb here of negation. And then we've got frequency. Instantly. Chill the old man. What are they describing? Well, it's describing the verb structure, as you can see. And in this case, actually, they've been placed inside the verb catena itself. Not is nearly always inside the verb catena. And then we've got an example of confirmation and degree. So he is certainly very well behaved. Now, all of this is part of actually the subject complement, but I wanted to show which ones are the adverbs within this adjective or phrase here, which is going to describe the subject he. So I've partly coloured the words certainly and very here to show which ones are actually adverbs. Notice well behaved itself actually is an adjective, even though it's using the word well, because actually well behaved is going to describe a noun. So it is an adjective structure, just a special case or special form here. Now, certainly is an adverb of confirmation. and very is an adverb of degree. So certainly is saying yes, and then very is describing the degree in which the person is well behaved. Now, adverbs of comment, words like, for example, fortunately, making a comment, which might actually give an opinion on an entire sentence in most cases, these will usually go at the beginning of a clause or a sentence, and in which case, if it's a sentence, they will be followed by a comma. And also interrogative adverbs, words like why or where, are also placed at the beginning of structures, in particular question structures, though these interrogative or questioning adverbs do not actually require a comma. Adverbs of conjunction, which include words like moreover, however, or when, can go at the beginning or between clauses. And relative adverbs, words like when, where, and why, and notice that there is a lot of interchange here. Depending on the word itself can actually be a relative adverb, or it can be an interrogative adverb, depending on how it's used. But these will be used before an adjectival clause, meaning a full clause with its subject and predicate, which is being used as an adjective, a relative clause. And these would then be relative adverbs. So let's take a look here then. The first example, luckily, comma, I arrived on time. So the prepositional phrase here, on time, is actually, I've shown it in this case being used as an adverb because that's what it is actually doing. And these are adverbs of comment, luckily, and an adverb related to time, on time. And then we've got an interrogative adverb. Why are you, being used to make the question structure here, so late? And so here being an adverb of degree, describing late. And then in the next example, the third example here, she will arrive when she arrives. So here, when is actually an adverb of conjunction. In fact, the entire clause, when she arrives, is actually an adverb of conjunction here. It's telling you actually the time that she will arrive. She will arrive when she arrives. Then the last one is a relative adverb before a relative clause. So here, I know the place. So in this place, where you work is describing the place. So this is acting or functioning as an adjectival, meaning it's essentially working as an adjective, even though it's a full clause. This is a relative adverb, actually just describing where that place is. So I know the place where you work, and where you work altogether is functioning as an adjective for the place. So this is a relative clause. Now, when using multiple adverbs or multiple adverbials, which can include prepositional phrases. So prepositional phrases function either as adjectives or as adverbs. But adverbs can also include full infinitives. That means to sleep, to run can function as adverbs as well. They will be adverbials when doing so. Or entire clauses, as we have seen, can in fact function as adverbs as well. So when using multiple adverbs or many adverbs to describe verbs, in general, and this is a very general statement, in general, starting after any verb objects, the order which should be followed should be adverbs of manner. That means how it's done, and then adverbs of place, where it is done, and then adverbs of frequency or time, when it is done, and then adverbs of reason, why it is done. And let's look at that order being used here in a sentence. So Piggy goes enthusiastically, how it is done, to the market daily. So to the market, by the way, is actually acting as an adverb of place where it is done. So to the market prepositional phrase is acting as an adverb of place. And then daily, this is frequency. At noon, this is a prepositional phrase acting as an adverb, showing time when it is done. And then to get his groceries. To get is a full infinitive or a to infinitive. It is acting as an adverb in this case. So this is acting as an adverb of reason. So regardless of actually what these things are, they are all really acting adverbially. And then you've got the object, his groceries. So Piggy goes enthusiastically to the market daily at noon to get his groceries. Now, this is the general order for placing adverbs. However, adverbs actually are quite mobile, as you will see shortly. So generally, though speaking, for other positioning principles, shorter adverbials tend to go before longer ones, and then more specific tend to go before less specific. And pre-modified, that means if you're modifying that adverb, they will tend with another adverb, obviously, because adverbs describe adverbs. So if you have an adverb describing an adverb, then it's a pre-modified adverb, and then that will usually go before all of the other adverbs. However, it is important to understand that adverbs actually represent the most mobile word class in the English language. That means they can quite happily move a lot. They can be placed really quite liberally, depending on what you want to give more stress and more meaning to in different parts of the expression. So in the examples below, all of them are correct grammatically. Now, once again, note that the prepositional phrases and the full infinitives, which actually have their own objects, like to get his groceries is the object of to get, the infinitive here, what he's getting, with their own objects, regardless of their categorization in form, all of them here are functioning adverbially as adverbs. So there are so many possibilities to the expression we saw on the previous slide. For example, at noon. Now, if you have an adverb at the beginning, you typically follow it with a comma. So you can see there's a comma whenever there's an adverb or adverbial at the beginning here. At noon, Piggy goes enthusiastically to the market to get his groceries daily. Enthusiastically, Piggy goes to the market to get his groceries daily at noon. Piggy goes to the market at noon daily to enthusiastically get his groceries. Daily at noon, Piggy goes to the market to get his groceries enthusiastically. And there are other possibilities. So the point I'm making here is that adverbs really are quite mobile. And though there is a general normal structure in which we place them, you can actually quite happily place them differently, again, depending on what you want to bring stress to in your communication. Now, when you're trying to describe, one of the best ways to do it is to actually choose a good verb that indicates what you actually, the message that you want to communicate. But also, in addition to the form of the verb, you want to decide very clearly whether you want to be using the present tense or the past tense, the two tenses that we have in English. We have just present and past, those two. And then you also want to decide which aspects you might want to add. And we have two aspects in English, progressive and perfect. Right? And then you want to decide if you want to include modality as well. All of this can actually help to give more detail as to the exact nature of the action, the occurrence, or the condition being expressed. Now, typically, and this is just a review here, past tenses will be used to describe something which is finished or completed. Present tense is used to describe that which is not finished or not completed. So naturally, you can guess then that present tenses are likely used for the future, and they are used for the future. For example, I am studying might mean now, I am studying tomorrow, and suddenly we're talking about the future. So that's the main difference between the two tenses we have. Past is finished, present is not finished. Let's look at a couple of examples here. Yesterday, and it's an adverbial at the beginning, so follow it with a comma. I went for a walk along a gorgeous canal near my house. Every weekend, comma, I go for a hike up a steep hill not far from my apartment. So for the first example, I went, well, you could probably guess from yesterday that we're talking about the past, but you need to use the correct form of the verb in that case. If you said yesterday I go, it would sound very strange. And every weekend, if it's every weekend, then I go is appropriate, and perhaps you shouldn't use I went. So pick the correct tense. For aspect, progressive aspect indicates an ongoing action. And you can happily add this aspect to past or present tense. And typically we use it when we are talking about a particular point in time. For example, now is a point in time. It's an always changing point in time, granted, but it is a point in time. So now I am studying. Now I am teaching. Now I am playing. Now, if we point to a point in time in the past or a point in time in the future, then this would be when we would use the action form. What were you doing at that point in time? So in the example here, when I opened the window is a point in time, then we can describe the action that occurred at that time. Also, it's often used for a period of time. For example, last night. And it's also used for future plans, for example, next Sunday. So in the examples here, when I opened the window, the sun was shining and the birds were singing. So when I opened the window, this entire expression is actually adverbial. It's telling you the time. And then actually we have another two clauses stuck together with a conjunction, and the sun was shining at that time, and the birds were singing at that time. Last night, the moon was smiling down at the world. Okay, so we've got a period of time last night, so we're going to talk about the action that was occurring during that period of time. And then also progressive aspect is used in present tense to talk about future plans. Next Sunday, we are playing tennis at school. Now, perfect aspect is added to past or present tense when a time's passed. For example, in the examples you'll see in a moment, before I saw it, or something from the past which is important to another time, whichever time you're talking about, is being highlighted. So perfect aspect is used really when we're talking about two times, two different time periods and their relationship to each other. Finally, modality can be added to indicate how we feel about what is being communicated. There are several methods of adding modality. Some can be done with simply using words to indicate how we feel about things, but also we use modal verbs, pure modal verbs, such as will, would, can, could, might, may, shall, should, and must. So for example here, before I saw the painting, so before I saw the painting is all adverbial, telling you the time. I hadn't considered art interesting. So you can see the relationship between two times here. So the first time is when you saw the painting, and then before that time is you had not considered art interesting. So the perfect aspect is formed by adding the have verb with a past participle. And I should have mentioned that the progressive aspect is formed with the be verb and ing. Take a look in the before the first unit in the book, and you will see actually there some explanations about the grammar and how to form this. But that's mostly book one rather than this book, so we won't go into too much detail here. The second one, the painting might be a mix of modern and Renaissance artistic styles. So here, might be, possibly, that's showing how you feel about it. It is possibly a modern and Renaissance artistic style. Let's move on then. So we've looked at all of the technical language required for describing, and there's a lot of it, and describing is not easy, which is why we reviewed all of the grammar at this stage. But now we want to look at strategies for describing things. Now, depending on your field of work or study, you may actually be required to describe one category of nouns much more than another category of nouns. For example, a psychologist often describes people, in particular their personalities. A surveyor would describe places. A designer would describe things, and a philosopher would describe ideas. Now, describing each of these different categories requires slightly different techniques. Now, when you're describing a person, there are two main considerations to that description. The first would be the person's appearance, and the second would be the person's personality. Now, for appearance, when you are describing, you want to start with more general details, such as the person's gender, their height, their weight, and perhaps their approximate age. Then you want to look at more specific features, such as their hair color, their hairstyle, their eye color, any prominent facial features, any prominent or noticeable bodily features. You should talk about specific clothing that is worn if you're describing what they are wearing today, for example, or in the picture. Or if you're describing their general dress style, you could talk about their general dress style. Now, for personality, consider what the main features of a person's personality are. And here you might want to ask some questions to yourself. Is the person shy or outgoing? Is he or she loud or quiet? Are they considerate or inconsiderate? Are they friendly or are they unfriendly? Consider how you would support these observations. Typically, in order to support observations about a person's personality, you would give examples taken from real life experiences with that particular person. Remember, you always want to support your idea, and for personality, it is actually your interpretation of their personality, in which case you need to be able to support your idea, your concept of this person as a person. Now, when describing nouns, the verbs used are often very dependent on the time when the experiences with the nouns occurred. So, for example, a living person would be described with present tense because they haven't finished themselves yet, while someone who has passed away would likely be described with past tense. So for example here, Albert Einstein became a scruffy, distracted and moody old man. My cousin is a lively and energetic 4-year-old boy. So Albert Einstein is clearly gone, so became, whereas my cousin is still here, so is. Now, for describing places, you want to start with a general description of the place and a general feeling that it gives you, that it evokes. For example, you might describe the picture underneath as a cozy bedroom. Then describe conditions affecting that place, such as the time of day, the lighting, the temperature, or the weather. That is, if you're describing it at a specific point in time. Now, after this, you want to flesh out or give more flesh to the skeleton that you've already created. That was what flesh out means. Flesh out the details by focusing on the most prominent feature of that place. So in the picture below, it's most likely going to be the bed, perhaps. That would be the main feature of this bedroom. And then describe this feature in detail first. Also, bear in mind or consider the feelings which this feature generates. Try to use adjectives within this physical description itself. That's why you've been learning about all these adjectives and adverbs, because that's how you describe things. So for example here, you might class it as an imposing bed. Then you want to move to the next most prominent feature. Use prepositions of location, such as in front of the bed, to the left of the bed, to tell your reader or to tell your audience, if you're speaking, where this new feature is in relation to that most prominent feature which you've just described. Continue this process, describing parts of this bigger picture in relation to each other until the final least significant features have been given their details. Now, a place is usually described in the present tense because it usually still exists, but it might be described in the past tense for a specific past experience with that place. So let's say you went there last weekend, and then you would describe it in the past tense for what it looked like when you went there. And also, we might use past tense for a place which doesn't exist anymore. For example, the park near my house is always an exciting place. So using is here because it's actually still around, hasn't gone anywhere. And then a trench during the Great War was a dark, wet and dismal place. So the trenches from the Great War, for the most part, no longer exist anymore, so that we're using the past tense there. Now, when you're describing a thing, consider first giving a general description of its functional purpose. For example, scissors. That we know what their functional purpose of that thing is, how it works, and the feelings that it gives you as well. Once again, flesh out the description by providing more details at this point. You can talk about its age, its size, its shape, its colors, and so on. Now, if it is an aesthetic work, which means artwork of some kind, you may describe it from an artistic standpoint, looking at its artistic aspects, such as its use of line, shape, form, space, value, color, and texture. Now, a thing is also typically described in the present tense. unless a specific past experience, once again, is being described, or if the thing has been destroyed, in which cases you would describe it in the past tense. Now, which tense is chosen may depend on your style, your writing style, though some interchange may occur when specific experiences are being given as support for what you are saying. Now, often when describing something which still exists, such as a tool or a work of art, or an image, especially an image such as a picture or a photograph, in these cases we will typically add progressive aspects. That means turn it into an action form in the cases of especially pictures or photographs. So, for example, my laptop computer is the most useful device in my house. Is present, just simple present here. When I was a child, my favorite toy was an Atari. I'm not a child anymore, and this is describing a past experience actually with a particular item. In this photo, we are all goofing around. Goofing around means having fun and playing. So using the be verb with the ing form, so are as the finite verb or the verb showing tense, and then goofing to show together the be verb and the ing, showing that this is an action form. And we'll commonly use this for pictures. Now, for describing ideas, this can be a little bit tricky because now the five senses are not really going to help us. So in all previous cases, of course, you should always be considering the five senses when you're describing something. Don't just describe how it looks unless you're only describing a picture, but you can also describe how the sun feels, how it smells, and if you're eating something, perhaps how it tastes. So always consider the five senses when it comes to descriptions, but ideas cannot really be described using the five senses. And this is because they are concepts, they're intangible, they are not concrete, we cannot touch them, we cannot feel them. For example, freedom is not something you can grasp, usually. And it might be a philosophy, for example, communism, capitalism, Marxism. Now, to describe this kind of idea, it's perhaps best to start with a dictionary definition. In fact, at this stage, I would probably argue that you should be referring to the writing process, even if you're not in the exercise of writing down your description. Most descriptions in this case would be written, but this would be part of the research that you should be following in the writing process. Now, if you agree with this definition, then support it in the usual way, using facts as your supporting sentences, using facts or details or explanations or examples or quotations. So if you agree with this explanation, support it. If your view of the idea actually is different, though, from the dictionary definition, then state your own interpretation, your own idea about what the meaning is, and then support your interpretation. For example, the dictionary definition of freedom may not be the same as your idea of what freedom actually is, in which case you make your own definition of what you think freedom is. Now, it is also possible to just, as I mentioned, just go for a totally non-dictionary definition as a starting point without bothering to look in a dictionary, or you could just simply stick your own idea in there. But with concepts or ideas, the main point is you need a definition. You need an idea of what you think this idea actually means. Now, in all cases, the quality of the support for the interpretation of the idea is key for your success in actually convincing people that this is a correct interpretation of this concept or idea. Now, ideas are usually described in the present tense because most ideas are still around unless a specific past practitioner or thinker is being referred to. For example, the difference between freedom and slavery is how much money you have. Okay, so this is a present interpretation of the idea, so we're going to use is in the present to talk about that. But if you refer to Plato in the past, so in the Republic, Plato described, past tense, democracy as anarchy, circa 375 BC. Now, a process is a series of steps which are taken to come to some kind of end result. We perform processes every day. When you get up, take a shower, get dressed. These are all steps there are steps to doing all of these things that we are following. Now, there's generally a reason for why any particular process is being performed. If you're at university, processes are often conducted with the purpose of teaching a lesson or teaching a skill through demonstration. While if you're at the workplace, then processes are typically performed to investigate or to research something which is important to the company, or they are used to produce some kind of product or some kind of service which the company will then go on to sell. Now, knowing why a process is being performed, the objective, or in the case of research, this is often called the hypothesis or the theory, which is being investigated. Knowing this is important for then being able to assess the results of the process and to be able to draw conclusions about your investigation. Detailed reasons for performing the process are usually given at the beginning of a work. And here we're now talking about a written work specifically. Depending on the complexity of the project, this might be a topic sentence. If it's just one paragraph, for example, then the reasons for performing the process will be contained in that topic sentence. If it's an essay, it will be contained in the introductory paragraph in the form of the thesis statement. If it is something larger, like an assignment or a journal article, then perhaps a whole introduction section of several paragraphs, possibly including a literature review, would be included as well. And this would all go to explain why the actual process is being performed. This will then be followed by detailing the actual mechanics of the process itself. Now, the process might be described in several sentences in support, which would then be in one academic paragraph. This would be the supporting sentences. Or for longer works, such as essays or assignments, this might be an entire section, such as the materials and methods section, which would be composed of several paragraphs in length. Now, often when we are describing acts in the context of academic works, passive rather than active voice is used. Now, this is particularly the case when a specific past process of some kind, such as an experiment, is being described. And the reason for this is that there is a tendency not to want to place emphasis on the first person, such as I or we. We did it, I did it. No, that's not what's important. What's important is what was done. So we want to stress actually the importance of what was done rather than who did it. And we do that by moving the object to the subject position or moving an object to the subject position, which is the most important part of what we want to describe. So for example here, we placed the solution in a glass jar. So we is not that important. The solution is more important. So we're going to change this to passive voice by adding the be verb in place of placed. Placed is past tense. Be verb changes to the past. And then we add the past participle of placed after it to the right, which is placed as well. So that becomes the solution was placed in a glass jar, putting stress on the solution rather than on who did it. Now, also, often imperative structures are used. Remember that these are orders or instructions which don't have a subject. Again, for the same reason here, the subject is not actually that important. So this is particularly done when you're describing a general process rather than a specific process conducted in the past. So when you're not describing one action that you did in the past, but rather a process on how to do something, such as how to make a cup of tea, we could use a full clause with a subject, such as you place the tea bag in the cup, but we are not actually saying you as a person. The you or who does it is not important. We want to detail the importance of the process itself rather than who's doing it. So we'll use an imperative structure here in most cases. Place the tea bag, whoever is going to follow the process, place the tea bag in the cup. Now, processes are often detailed chronologically, meaning in order of time, in order in which they occur. So as such, adverbial transitions are commonly used for sequencing, and these would include words like first, second, third, next, then, finally, and adverbial transitions for time as well, such as after, before, during, meanwhile, now, simultaneously, subsequently. Now, when placed at the start of a sentence, these sequencing adverbs, don't forget, should be followed by a comma. So, for example, here, the jar was subsequently refrigerated at -20 degrees Celsius. So here that means that the jar was then or after the previous event refrigerated. And you can use then here as well. So starting with then and a comma. So then the jar was refrigerated at -20 degrees C. Now, the results of the process can then be described and possibly a conclusion or a discussion about these results held or given. Now, once again, in shorter, simpler processes, if you're writing it out, these may be simply sentences. So, for example, if it's one paragraph, your concluding sentence may simply indicate the results of the process that you have done. In an essay, it would likely be several sentences, a paragraph of conclusion. If it is an assignment or a journal article, then your results section might be separated from your discussion section, actually, and both of those might have several paragraphs of results and discussions in them. Let's summarize. To describe people, places, things or ideas, all of which are nouns, you will need to have a large repertoire of adjectives. That means a large number available to you of adjectives. And you need to know how to use these adjectives correctly to describe these nouns. If you wish to describe actions, occurrences or conditions, all of which are verbs, Or if you wish to describe adjectives or other adverbs, then you need to know how to convert or change adjectives to their adverbial form. And this is typically done with the addition of ly. And of course, you need to know the exceptional adverb forms, the ones which are not converted by the addition of ly. Also, to describe well, you need to know how to compare. That means how to use comparatives in most cases, or the not as happy as structure. And you need to be able to show the best or the worst in its class using superlatives. And you need to be able to do this with both adjectives and with adverbs. For strategies to describe, the best strategy depends on what is actually being described. So if it's a person, then it's going to be very different from describing a thing, which is very different from describing an action or a process. Now, as these are inevitably written descriptions at this stage, don't forget to follow the writing process and basic paragraph structure, where you will have, if it's a paragraph that you're writing, a topic and main idea, followed by supporting sentences to support your main idea, and then a concluding sentence. For longer works, you want to be constructing an introduction, a body section, and a conclusion section. For an essay, these would be one paragraph for your introduction, one for your conclusion, and several body paragraphs. Or if it's an assignment or a journal article, these would be composed of several paragraphs in each of these subsections. And that concludes today's lecture on descriptions and how to describe things well. Thank you once again for your attention, and I'll see you next time.